Well, last week, Isaac Shade and Leaf Tulane discussed the best shooters in all of college basketball. Today, we're going to talk best overall scorers in the game, and we got some fun players to discuss right here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, Leaf Tulane and I are back, and we are continuing our series started last week, kind of talking about some of the best players at their respective roles. We talked shooters last week, or I should say Leaf and Isaac talked shooters last week. Today, we're talking scorers. In the future, we'll talk passers, shot blockers, etc. But wanted to have some fun with it today. Instead of just kind of doing it over the course of one segment, we're going to spread this thing out for a full show and basically draft. Each of us are going to draft an 8-man rotation of the best scorers in college basketball. I have left the rules for either of us pretty open-ended. We're basically just trying to outscore the opponent. Whatever we think are the best scorers in college basketball, of course, it's a very subjective conversation. Are we talking mid-major guys? Are we talking high-major guys in offenses that maybe don't score as much, but who are very efficient? Like, there's a lot of different factors, and I'm really looking forward to getting an opportunity to kind of hash out some of these high-level scores in this game as we get closer and closer to the 2023-24 season. So, Leaf, I am going to kick it off to you as always and give you the first pick of who you think is going to be one of the most prolific scorers in college basketball this upcoming season.
I don't have the most stunning pick here. I thought about going a little off the deep end to start. I got some deep cuts, but I'll start with Zach Edey.
Yeah.
Zach Edey scored a lot. He scored a lot against good competition. He did so for a team that was number one seed, which is something you'll hear consistent in what I'm saying of throughout this is I'm going to usually choose players that I think will help score for good teams. That won't be just empty point getters. Because I think a lot of players, like especially in the NBA, you see a lot of players score 30, and it's empty. So with Zach Edey scored 22.3 points per game. He obviously was a rebounding and anchor defensively too. That's not important to what we're talking about here. But Zach Edey is unstoppable. He gets onto the block and he turns over his left shoulder and he knocks down a jump hook. He steps through, he dunks it. He's a good passer. He shoots free throws well. He shot 61% as the focal point of an offense that was a big centric league in the Big Ten. And yeah, I think he's only going to be better this year as a player. He may not score as much because I think Purdue actually got better as a team. And but it's hard to argue with taking him as the number one pick as someone who's going to get you 20 and 15 pretty much every night.
Yeah, I think Edey is the obvious first choice. And I think, again, for all the reasons you listed, he not only was a productive 20 per game scorer, which there aren't that many 20 per game guys in college basketball, but he did it for the top team in the country. And it's hard to deny that when looking at this exercise. So I'm going to go, the two guys that I have next on my list are both transfers. And so it's always a little bit tricky to figure out like how that might look at a different school. One of them is coming up from a lower major school up to a high major school. The other guy is transferring across, staying in a high major conference. I think that's who I'm going to go with here. Not quite as prolific of a scorer as Zach Edey, but I'm going to go with Hunter Dickinson coming over from Michigan to Kansas. I think there's a bit of intrigue in terms of how he's going to adjust to moving from the Big Ten, to the Big 12. But for me, I think Bill Self has done a really good job of utilizing low post players historically. I think, looking from the roster perspective, DeJuan Harris is a great passer. They got some shooters on that floor, I think, that are going to space it for Dickinson. I think he's going to have a really productive season. I get 18.5 points per game last year at Michigan, but as a consistent 18 per game guy the last 2 years. And I think we're going to see him be up in that range, maybe a little bit higher for a team that I expect to be in the top 5, probably top 3 throughout the season in Kansas.
Yeah, that's the guy I kind of expected to be taking number 2. So he was one that if he'd fallen, I probably would have pounced on it.
Mhm.
And I know who you're alluding to with the other one, but I'm actually going to leave him there for you. I got a guy that I think is going to be the best freshman in the country in terms of scoring. I'm going to take Isaiah Collier.
Yeah.
I think Isaiah Collier at SC, I mean, his backcourt may actually lead that team in scoring, but it's just in terms of scoring ability, I think Isaiah Collier is the guy. At a certain point, I really like to take talent when I take a score, just the way, the plethora of ways that he can score. He's explosive enough to get to the rim and dunk it. He shoot the ball from three. He'll operate at pick and rolls, and score from all three levels, crafty enough to shoot floaters. There's a few other guys that I would strongly consider that have more college tape. Obviously, he has none, but it's hard to miss out on the top end talent that Isaiah Collier possesses. And I'm very eager to see what USC does. As we're recording this, USC is picked second in the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 I think will be a pretty good conference this year. It may not be as top heavy with UCLA likely taking a slight bit of a drop, but I think they're going to get 6-7 teams into the tournament. I think USC may be just as good as they're predicted to be.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. I think I wasn't sure how soon I was willing to pick freshman, but I definitely think Collier is going to be a guy who does a lot. And I agree with you. And top 7, top 8 on my list is the USC backcourt running mate with Isaiah Collier. So it'll be interesting to see how those two guys kind of split time in that backcourt from a scoring perspective. But I alluded to it already, so I'm just going to go ahead and take him. It's Max Abmas for my next pick. Guy who's averaged over 22 or higher points per game in the last 3 years. Of course, those all came at Oral Roberts in the Summit League. Now he's at Texas, where he may not even be the best scorer in his backcourt, or at least the best guard in his backcourt. I think he'll probably be the best scorer with Tyrese Hunter there for Rodney Terry's team. But Abmas is a guy who's been a prolific three-point shooter throughout his career. He's been an efficient scorer around the rim, especially for a guy at his size. He's just showcased so much talent. He's a fantastic free throw shooter. There's very little that he can't do as an offensive player. And now we have to see how that translates at the high major level. And that's the risk here is a guy like this. Yeah, he's not going to score 22 points a game, most likely for Texas next year. That would be very shocking if he were able to do that. But in terms of his ability to score the basketball and what we've seen from him the last really 4 years, but particularly the last 3 years where he's been over 22 points per game, I think it's hard to ignore him in an exercise like this.
Yeah, he's got the accolades probably to be number one on this. I just question how real it is when he's playing against the Big 12. Like when he's opposed by DeJuan Harris, Jamal Shed on back-to-back nights.
Right.
What's going to be the outcome of that? And like you said, I think Tyrese Hunter could be the best player in that backcourt. So with my fifth pick or third pick overall, for me, fifth pick overall, I'm torn between two guards. I'm trying to get both of them, so I don't want to tip my cap too much. But I'll take the guy that I think's the better basketball player. I'll take Riley Kugel. And this is a guy you may be saying, "Oh, wait a minute, scoring wise, that guy didn't score that much," and you'd be correct. Riley Kugel, to me, is going to take the largest leap in terms of points per game of a guy who was already basically a double-digit scorer. Like, you can only improve so much. There's going to be someone in the country that goes from like 4 to 19. That's going to be larger. But Riley Kugel, after Colin Castleton got hurt, showed all the flashes. He scored 9.9 points per game last year. But there was a stretch of games where he finished off his year. I just pulled up his last 10 games. 13, 14, 21, 19, 20, 24, 17, 12, 18, 15. And I read that backwards. So if you guys are being super, super strict on that, I was just reading from top to bottom. But in terms of points, those are double digits. That's a freshman who was thrust into a role that was uncomfortable. Yes, some of the efficiency wasn't great. I expect him to be a 20-a-game scorer for a Florida team in the SEC, and that's really hard to do in the SEC. And I think he'll be a lottery pick as well.
I like that pick as well. I think another really solid just guy who's proven that he can do it. And we didn't see it over a full season, but I think that the way Todd Golden has developed guards, I think there's a lot of promise for Riley Kugel entering that next season for Florida. Well, we're going to continue drafting the best scorers in the upcoming 23-24 college basketball season. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Football season is here, folks, and FanDuel is giving you the best chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every single time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every single victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Folks, want to thank all of you for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or first watch of the day. Remind you, we are free and available on all podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. So go hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. We are continuing our draft of the best scorers in all of college basketball. As a reminder, in the first segment there, Leaf took Zach Edey, Isaiah Collier, and Riley Kugel. I took Hunter Dickinson and Max Abmas. And now with my third pick, I'm looking at a handful of guards as well. A lot of guards who would be kind of rough fits alongside Abmas. So I'm trying to determine if that's worth factoring in or not. But I think I am going to go with another smaller guard, and I'm going to go with a guy who averaged 16 per game last year in the SEC, and that's Wade Taylor IV. Really prolific guard for that team last year. And again, very undersized. He's listed at 6 foot. So I think if this were a real roster construction, that might be a little bit of a challenge for my squad, but a guy who really broke out in a big way. He was productive as a freshman, but really kind of shined last year, bumped that 3-point percentage up over 35%. Excellent free throw shooter, good at driving into traffic and drawing contact. And I think we're going to see him take another leap, potentially be an SEC first teamer, potentially be the SEC player of the year. I think he's in that conversation without a doubt, and wouldn't be surprised to see him up over 17 points per game, maybe in that 18 point per game range for what I expect to be a pretty solid Texas A&M squad.
He's definitely someone who is on my list, and I'm excited to see Texas A&M. I kind of alluded to this in a tweet, and we discussed it a while ago. Is I think Texas A&M is one of the more underrated teams by national polls, and I think Fox is releasing theirs tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to see that, and I bet they'll fall around 16, 17. I'd personally take them 11 or 12. I was pretty worried when you started talking about 16 a game before you said SEC. I'm going to be taking Trey Alexander.
Oh, nice.
Creighton. He's someone that I think this year, with the absence of Kaluma, with the absence of Nembhard, the still ever looming presence of Ryan Kalkbrenner, he's someone that I think is primed to break out. Like, there was talk about how well he played as a point guard when he was the 2 as a freshman. Last year he was the 2 again, and he was very good. I saw him play live, and he just snakes into the spots in the mid-range. He's a good shooter off the perimeter. He's also a good defender. I know that's not very pertinent to this discussion, but it's just like I like a good, well-rounded basketball player. I think he's going to lead the Creighton Blue Jays in scoring. Creighton's going to be a top 10 team. It may be a more egalitarian attack. Like, Stephen Ashworth is a shooter. He'll score. Shireman will shoot and score. Kalkbrenner will be a double-digit scorer, and maybe Isaac Trout and or Mason Miller will score. But I think he's the guy at the end of the games that's going to go get you buckets. I think he's one of the best bucket getters in college basketball. I also saw him play at the NBA Combine, and I was impressed with just the way with which he was able to create space. So maybe in terms of counting stats, he will be a 15-16 guy. But in terms of who I want the ball in the hands of to score for me, he may not be like the best point guard. He may not be the best facilitator. But if I want to score for some of these top 10, top 15 teams, it's probably who I go to. And this is a little sort of a side note. How many teams have their best players be bigs? Like, you can make an argument it's Kalkbrenner. Kalkbrenner is probably their most important piece. Like, when he was out, they were really bad last year, and he was in, they were really good. Dickinson is on the number 2 team. Edey, Filipowski is likely going to be taken soon. But what players at the end of games usually get the ball? It's usually guards. Yeah. And I would say of the top 10, Alexander may be the guy I'm most confident in to get me a bucket at the end of the game.
Yeah, I like Trey Alexander a lot. He was somebody who was certainly on my list. And I swear I had this idea before you said his name, but I am going to take Kyle Filipowski with my next pick. There was 2 or 3 bigs that I was kind of looking at, a couple guards that I still think are intriguing, including our USC friend that we haven't taken yet. But Filipowski wasn't the most efficient scorer last year as a true freshman. Is only 50% on 2s, about 28% on 3s. But I expect those numbers to tick up. We see so many players make that kind of sophomore leap. And I think for Duke, Duke to have the continuity that they have on the roster, I think will only help him continue to develop and grow as a more efficient scorer. It'll be interesting to see how he looks defensively. I know that's not part of the exercise, but he's a guy who seems to have good touch, 15 per game last year, again, as a true freshman. I think there's a real opportunity for him to take that leap and be, maybe his numbers don't explode. I'm not, he's probably maybe not going to average 22 or anything like that, but I think we'll see him be more efficient, be more effective, and lead a Duke team that I expect to be very, very good this season.
Yeah, I think he's going to be the face of that team. The question to me is who's the best player? I would take Proctor, but I think the best scorer is Filipowski.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a guy that you'll know well, but maybe not all of the listeners do. I'm going to take St. Mary's point guard Aidan Mahaney.
Yeah.
I love Aidan Mahaney. He may be my favorite player in college basketball. Not quite sure. I think he's got a very good case to be. He was a freshman last year, scored 14 a game. And for those of you who don't know, Randy Bennett's teams do not play quickly. So 14 a game, you can, if you were to inflate that to a typical pace, that's probably 17, 18 a game. In big games, he was dynamite. Like he was sensational. He had one bad big game or two bad big games as a freshman, really. And he was awesome the rest of the year. He's someone that I expect to score 15, 16 points a game, but again, inflate that to pace of possession to however you like. He's a great shooter, shot 39% from three with a very heavy workload with a team that the teams were keyed in on him from the start. He's going to get bigger. He's going to get stronger. He's also a very good passer. And he's just got this creative flair that I can't unsee. He's someone that I think is more fun to watch than just about anyone. And he's on a team that's fairly rigid in structure. I wonder if he had the creative license that you see with Tyler Kolek at Marquette. You wonder what Mahaney could do. But I think he's going to become more of a household name this year than he was for a team that was already a 5 seed last year. And I think will likely replicate that sort of success.
Yeah, I love Aidan Mahaney. I do think that he probably gets a bit of a knock on this in terms of playing in a team that has much fewer possessions because of the way that they play stylistically under Randy Bennett, but that made the fact that he averaged 14 points per game all the more impressive. I think Aidan Mahaney is a superstar in waiting, and I think between him and Riley Kugel, one of those guys is going to pop in a major way this year, potentially both of them for your squad. So I'm kind of looking, there's a handful of kind of veteran guards. I'm looking at a few that are transfers up again, but I already kind of did that with A. Smith. So I'm going to go with a guy who's spent a whole bunch of time at the Power 5 level, entering his 5th and final season. I know a guy you're not as high on, Leaf, but I'm going to go with Terrence Shannon Jr., a guy who's been a double-digit scorer in 3 of the past 4 years, was 9.8 as a freshman at Texas Tech. So basically has been a double-digit scorer his entire career. Really took off in a big way last year for Illinois, 17 points per game. We saw the efficiency numbers drop a little bit for him, only 32% from 3. I kind of expect that was maybe a bit more of an aberration than anything else, as he was over 36% the last couple of years at Tech. So if he can be a bit more of an efficient 3-point shooter, I wouldn't be surprised to see him back in that 16, 17 point per game range for an Illinois team that is a little bit hard to pin down exactly right now. But I think they made some nice additions in the transfer portal, and I think Shannon's going to be a guy who has the ball in his hands a lot and does a lot of scoring this season for that squad.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's the second leading scorer in the Big Ten. I think Edey's probably the first, and then Shannon's likely second or third. So I don't love him as a player as much as some. Like, I think a lot of people may see him as like a candidate to be an All-American, first-team All-American, and maybe he can be. But I've been continually underwhelmed with the impact on winning that he's had.
Yeah.
See, I'm very guard heavy in my team right now. I took Zach Edey. I took a behemoth. I've got myself a lot of guards, and I do have more guards to go to, but I'm going to take a wing here, and I think this is one that will surprise you. I'm going to go with Bryce Hopkins of Providence. He is someone that can score the ball, was the Big East Player of the Year in a loaded Big East conference. The Big East had Marquette win it. They had Kolek win Player of the Year as well. I think it was an award that was Kolek won, and Hopkins was first team, and he was projected to win. So I take that back. Excuse me. That said, he was first team, and this is a wing group that he had to contend with guys like Adama Sanogo, Kalkbrenner in the front courts, and then he had to fend off wings like Andre Jackson, Jordan Hawkins, and all these players, and yet he emerged from that And I think he's only going to have more license to score under Kim English this year, because Ed Cooley is a great coach, but he plays fairly slowly. He plays methodically. I think Kim English is going to speed things up, and you're going to see Hopkins get more license to score. And as it is, he was scoring 16 a game, corralling about 9 rebounds a game, shot 36% from three, and he shot 11 shots per game. I think he shoots 13, 14 shots per game, and he gets up to 18, 19 points. And now you got a power forward guy who can play 3 or 4, who can really shoot the ball. And so I know we're not really roster constructing, but I think he would be someone that I would need to take in order to build a team that has more depth and front court size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I honestly, Hopkins was right below Terrence Shannon on my list. So that's a guy that was a little bit of a surprise. I wasn't sure you were going to take him, but certainly somebody who I think deserves to be in this conversation, especially in what I imagine is going to be a fun offense for Coach Kim English. We're going to close out today's show with our final picks for the best scorers in the country. We're also going to talk about some honorable mentions, all that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best, most qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, and then you just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. From there, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Because honestly, right now, hiring the right team member can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. And that's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Leaf, closing out our draft here. 5 more picks between the two of us discussing the best scorers in all of college basketball. Handful of guys that I've been thinking about for the last couple of picks that I'm finally going to take here. One of them is coming over from Syracuse. That is Judah Mintz. Judah Mintz, a guy who averaged 16 points per game last year for the Orange. You're seeing him showing up on a lot of lists as a potential real breakout candidate this upcoming season. I think the backcourt duo of Mintz and JJ Starling should make Syracuse under Red Autry a particularly interesting team in the first year of the post-Jim Boeheim era. Again, Mintz wasn't incredibly efficient last year, which is part of the reason that I kind of kept passing on him. But again, as a true freshman to average 16 points per game, I think you're going to see an uptick. Maybe the outside shooting ticks up a little bit. Wasn't a super high volume guy last year, but I think there's a chance that he's even more efficient next year, gets more attempts per game. He shot about 13 shots last year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be a guy who's in that conversation as one of the leading scorers in the ACC. And if Syracuse ends up kind of climbing into that top 25 conversation, he could be an all-league caliber player next year.
Yeah, he's one with a lot of potential. It's untapped at this point. You see the skill, and then he came back from the combine. And a lot of times, those type of players that come back from the combine and are trying to retool their games end up really performing well. Yeah. This is the part where I'm going to take some potential swings. I'm going to take Cam Jones from Marquette. I think Marquette has 2 players that are more important to their success than Cam Jones, but I think Cam Jones will lead them in scoring. And I think he's set to take a leap. He shot 12 shots per game last year, shooting at 47% from the field, and scored 15 points a game. He's a dynamic shooter. When he's hot, he's hot. He shot 37%. I think he'll get more shots this year, even shoot more threes. And I think I read an article saying that they felt like Cam Jones at times was playing too hard, trying to play within the team, and they want him to take shots. So I think Marquette, like I said, I'm gonna factor in. I think good teams matter. So the way he scores will be vital to the success of a very good team in Marquette, the team that I think is the best team in the Big East. So I'm going to take Cam Jones, and I know it's redundant with a bunch of guards, but they score differently. Is my little bit of a nuanced claim there. Cam Jones to score 16 or 17 points in the Big East and be a #1 type seed caliber team. So I'm gonna roll with that one.
I like it. I'm debating between a couple of bigs here, kind of different in different places. One of them's in the A10. One of them is kind of a stalwart in the ACC. But I'm actually going to go with the A10 big, and that's DaRon Holmes, a guy who was 60% on twos last year. Not an efficient three-point shooter, but really low volume there. 18.5 points per game for Dayton in his sophomore year. Really, really productive scorer. Incredibly talented guy, 6'10" big. I think he's, again, people might maybe squint their eyes a little bit at picking somebody from a school like Dayton in the A10 as opposed to a Power 5 guy. But Holmes proved himself to be one of the most prolific scorers in all of college basketball last year. And again, there is a difference between Dayton and some other mid-major schools in much smaller conferences. The A10 is really competitive, really talented, a lot of good defensive teams there. And for him to be able to put up 18 as a sophomore, especially after averaging 13 as a freshman, this guy has proven he can get buckets at the college basketball level. And I'm happy to have him on this roster.
Yeah, I think he's someone that is also going to come back with feedback from the pros saying this is what you need to work on, and I think it'll increase his volume, especially because Tumani Kamara left Dayton, so you may see even more usage for Holmes. This is my last pick, I believe, so I'm quite torn. I have one freshman and one fifth-year senior.
Very different.
And I'll go with the fifth-year senior, and this is the team that this is my adoptive team this year that I really like, and I'm kind of rooting for them to win it all because I think they have a chance to. I'm going to go with Michigan State's Tyson Walker.
Yeah.
Tyson Walker, I think, is the best scorer on Michigan State, which is a really balanced team, so you won't see crazy numbers, but at the end of games, man, is he good. Like when they needed a bucket against Kansas State to send it to overtime, who'd they go to despite not having like the best game? Like Joey Hauser at 18 at that point. AJ Hogard had plenty of points. Tyson Walker had like 9, maybe 11 points. And he got the ball, rolls to his left, and puts in a lefty scoop shot against Michigan State. He sends the game into to a tie. He's really clutch. He scores well at the end of games. He's someone that I think will be a first-team All-Big Ten guy. I was surprised he wasn't unanimous because they put 10 players in. I thought that was baffling. And why? Okay, this is not meant to be a shot at Jameer Young, but Jameer Young also is a transfer from a mid-ranger. He came from Charlotte to Maryland. Michigan State's projected to be the better team. Tyson Walker scored the same amount basically as Jameer Young. Why is Jameer Young a unanimous Big Ten first team and Tyson Walker is not?
Yeah. It's interesting conversation, interesting question. I like Tyson Walker as a pick here. And I am rounding it out. And I had a couple, like, maybe not dark horse, but like mid-major guys I wanted to pick. And I am going to go in that direction, but I'm a little baffled by some of the veteran high major guards that are still available. I know only 16 guys to choose from here, but I'm going to go with the guy that I really wanted to take with my final pick, and I'm going to just go ahead and do it. And that's Jamal Mashburn Jr. from New Mexico. A guy who averaged 19 points per game last year. He averaged 18 points the year before that. The Mountain West is a pretty defensive focused conference. You see a lot of low scoring games in the Mountain West. And for a guy to come out and put up 18 plus points per game in 2 consecutive seasons, he bumped his 3-point percentage from 34 to 38 last year. Obviously, he takes a lot of shots, but he's not the most efficient scorer in the world. But back-to-back 18-point per game seasons for a guy in the Mountain West is really hard to ignore. And I think Jamal Mashburn is a guy who doesn't get as much love, as much attention. Started his career at Minnesota and, averaged 8 points per game as a freshman in the Big Ten. So certainly a guy who proved he can do it at that level, even, not as prolifically as he ended up doing at New Mexico, but a guy that I think is primed for yet another really high-scoring season this upcoming season in the Mountain West.
I like that one. I think if we were to like go conference by conference, he would have come to my mind, but he's one that like sneaks under the radar because, like you said, the Mountain West typically is defensively oriented. I'm not to give too many extras, but I just thought about a few honorable mentions.
Yeah.
One bigger player that I think I forgot when compiling this list initially was Drew Pember. I thought about taking him with my last pick there, but I really like Tyson Walker.
Yeah.
And then the freshman that I was thinking about was DJ Wagner at Kentucky. Similar appeal to Isaiah Collier at USC. I think Collier's the better player, but Wagner won the Jordan Brand Classic MVP. He's a scorer. The question is, in that hierarchy that gets established at Kentucky every year, who emerges? Is it Justin Edwards? Is it DJ Wagner? Is it Reeves? And so that's my only deterrent is I just don't know how and who they'll play through.
Yep. I had a couple of honorable mentions as well that I figure I'll read here before we get us out of here for today's show. For me, this is in the order that I wrote them in, which is not necessarily the order I picked players in, but Boo Buie from Northwestern, guy who averaged 17 per game last year, and Boogie Ellis, who we kind of alluded to a handful of times, but he never ended up actually getting taken, to veteran high major guards who averaged over 17 points per game last year. I also had Jordan Dingle. I considered him a lot because 23.5 points per game last year at Penn, but I think he's going to be one of, if not the leading scorer for St. John's this year, but not sure how impactful he will be. Certainly not as impactful as he was at Penn. I also had Drew Pember on my list. I also had Ray J. Dennis transferring up to Baylor from Toledo, guy who nearly averaged 20 per game last year. I alluded to Armando Bacot as an option for me before I took Holmes. Obviously a guy who's been doing it for a long time for the Tar Heels. AJ Mitchell at Santa Barbara is another mid-major guard I had on my list. And then closing it out with a few more names. Caleb Love, not the most efficient scorer, but a guy who does it. I also had RJ Davis on here as well, the kind of former North Carolina tandem. Dylan Jones at Weber State, Isaiah Stevens at Colorado State, PJ Hall at Clemson, Tyler Perry at Kansas State, transferring from North Texas. And then one of my kind of other dark horses that I chose Mashburn over is Ray Harrison at Grand Canyon, who's averaged 17 points per game the last couple of years. And then closing it out with Justin Moore at Villanova. So a lot of guys that didn't quite make the cut here, but that I think are going to have very productive scoring seasons in college basketball this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. And one I'd like to toss in is Tristan da Silva.
Yeah,
he scored just about 16 a game last year. He and Simpson, his backcourt, well, he's a forward, but running the backcourt for Colorado, I think are going to be victimized by each other's successes in terms of that neither of them are really going to score too much more. But I think he's a guy that makes himself a first round caliber pick, and Colorado gets back to the tournament. Tad Boyle is going to have one of the best teams he's had. And I think he's going to become a name brand type of guy in college basketball, which Colorado hasn't been since McKinley Wright.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how Da Silva and Simpson and Cody Williams, a freshman coming in, and even Eddie Lampkin, who's probably not going to do a lot of scoring, but it'll be interesting to see how they kind of split duty there. But I'm excited about what Colorado's got going for them. But Leaf, that's going to wrap us up for today. This is a very fun exercise, get a chance to look at the best scorers in college basketball. We'll be back on Friday with some more of our conference previews, discussing everything going on in some of those small major conferences. We'll also, of course, keep you updated on the Gonzaga, the Big 12 rumors, and everything else going on as we're getting into media days for various conferences. As we're getting right up to it, folks, college basketball is just a few weeks away from the opening, and we are very excited to continue these kind of conversations here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Follow us on Twitter. You can also find the show wherever you get podcasts. It is free and available in all those spots. We'll be back on Friday with one more show to close out the week. Thank you so much for listening. And until tomorrow, peace out.